Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the City Futures Committee meeting discussing the strategic framework for the Tauranga City Council. Just remember, in terms of health and safety, if the alarm does sound, please leave through the exit, out onto the Devonport Road and down the hill. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. And please ensure that your phones are on silent. Thank you. So this strategic framework open workshop is in preparation of our next long-term plan to give us an understanding of the current strategic framework and how it impacts on our decisions going forward. And for this, I'm going to hand over to Christine and Jeremy. Jeremy's the Manager, Strategic and Corporate Planning. We're all yours, Jeremy.
Thank you. Jeremy's going to eat his chocolate, so I'll do the intro and then we'll swap over. So one of the things you talked about before the annual plan process was what was the strategic framework and that you wanted to have a conversation about your views around the future of the city and identifying what that might look like, and that would also shape your initial conversations around the upcoming long-term plan that you'll need to develop. So the purpose of the session is to give you an overview of what currently is in place in terms of a strategic framework. Then we'd be looking for some guidance from you about which elements of it do you like, what would you want to retain, what are you looking to achieve, and are there parts or all of it that you'd want to amend in some way, or is it content within there or direction within the framework that you'd like to shape in a way that links to your view of where you want to proceed, and that obviously, as I said, would link through into the long-term plan. So if we spend the sort of first little bit just giving you an overview of what's there and how it got there, and then it would be good to hear from you about what are you looking for, and then we can work out how we can provide guidance and support and make whatever it is that you want to happen. And I know that you are also having some of your own conversations, and that might be the sort of the part two after this. So just in terms of an overview, the purpose is to talk to you about our direction, which is the terminology for the strategic direction that sits there, and to get some direction from you about where you want to go. So there is a handout in front of you, which is the sort of the one-page A3 that shows how everything is interconnected, and we'll work through bits of it and use it as pick out bits as an example so you can see how the framework actually works. Sort of takes us to the next slide. What is the framework? It's a really line of sight between what council's doing or needs to do and the outcomes that the community wants us to deliver on. It's really a structure that holds the things together so you can clearly see where we're going and how we're going to get there. And most local authorities have a structure that looks pretty much broadly like this, slight variations. Generally broadly has the same themes but framed different ways, but you can pick out the same concepts. It's really around the content within that differs between councils more so, that distinguishes a particular council or a particular community and what they want to achieve. So that's really where the variation or the specificity comes in. As I say, the structure broadly looks the same and the high level statements are quite similar. It's the content that sits within it that is quite specific. So Jeremy will talk a little bit about how we got to here in the first place.
So just a quick one for the format for this from here on out. Jeremy's going to present in blocks, a few slides. So please save your questions until Jeremy pauses, and then ask questions on the slides that he's covered. Because there's a number of slides and your question may get answered at a later point. Carry on, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. So just a little bit initially, just to talk about how we got to here. So a lot of this work has been created with the community. We'll start at the top and talk about the vision, and there was two massive pieces of work which were undertaken over a sort of 2 or 3 year period. One, the Vital Updates report, which generated a lot of feedback. 5,000 people were involved in that. We asked them about 3 or 4 questions at the outcomesy sort of level. What do you value in Tauranga? What do you want to protect in the city? And what's one thing you would change? So if 5,000 people answered that, that's 15,000 bits of information which filtered into the mix.
Which year is
That was 2020. So 2020 vital updates, and we got the report back, I think, right at the end of 2020, so into 21. And then the second one was the My Tauranga Vibe campaign, which was more like 22-ish, something like that. That was more internet-driven. It was kind of funkier and sexier, and one of the briefs at the time was don't make it look like a council thing. There was a lot of Instagram posts, a lot of Facebook engagements. We painted decals on streets and asked people to sort of respond to what they saw with a big plastic thing on a street corner. 3,900 people started that survey and answered a bunch of questions there about what they valued in the city, and all that went into a big mix. You're pausing with your finger on that.
Vital Signs is also a joint partnership.
Yep, so the Vital Updates process was in partnership with Bay Trust, with TECT, and with somebody else. Yeah, there was 3 different parties. We put a lot of effort in the Vital Updates in particular to reaching what at the time were underrepresented communities. So rather than the usual people submitting to a council process, we particularly targeted, and this was, that the Vital Updates was 2 bits of work joined together. One was at a very high level, community outcomes, what's your future for your city sort of level. And then there was a bunch of detail at a real granular neighbourhood level driven by the community development team. And they did most of the legwork, and they targeted youth, the aged, Māori, the homeless, stroke the housing challenged, disabled people and new migrants, because they were historically underrepresented in most council processes. And they put a lot of effort, a lot of energy, worked with groups in the community to make sure that those people who dealt with the migrant community or dealt with the housing challenged were involved in the process to generate some of that feedback. So it was very broad. The My Tauranga Vibe one was a younger cohort. Just looking at the numbers I got here, 36% of people who took part in that were under the age of 34. So we were really focusing there, the way we did it, and only 8% were over the age of 65. So it skewed the way we normally receive information from the community, which is often skewed towards the older ages. We consciously made an effort to skew it younger to make sure we were getting that input. So all of that information, as well as some work with WSP, some work with David Cunliffe's team on stakeholder strategies and various other bits of information, we went back and looked at all the submissions to previous annual plans and LTPs for the last sort of 3 or 4 years before that to glean some of that higher level outcomesy sort of stuff. All of that went into the big melting pot, and eventually we ended up with the vision. At a lower level, things like the strategies, and then later on the action and investment plans, many of those are developed with community input as well, sometimes at a stakeholder level, sometimes with broader community input as well. So it's not a case of sitting there and thinking that the policy wonks all sat in a small room for a week and a half and created this thing. It's come up from the roots and guided by the team here and the subject matter experts in the team. So while I've got the strategy team, a lot of the input from TCC on these things comes actually from the subject matter expert teams rather than just the strategy team. So that's just a bit of background as to how we got to where we got to. So that then, over a period of time, created the vision for Tauranga, which was adopted by the commissioners in 2022, he says, roughly. It's not Tauranga Together We Can. That's not the vision. The vision is all those words joined together. The key thing which came out of the distillation of all those bits of work were the 3 main pillars of that vision: the nature, the environment area, the lifting each other up, the inclusivity, and the possibility and the vibrancy stuff. Those are the 3 main pillars which came through those combined pieces of work, and they were then wordsmithed into something which was eventually adopted by the commissioners. So that sits right across the top in orange on your A3 paper. the next layer down are a translation of that into how TCC contributes to achieving that vision over time. And the top layer is the community outcomes. These are a requirement of the Local Government Act, a requirement which is about to change potentially. So the current requirement is that the definition of community outcomes is written down somewhere. The outcomes that a local authority aims to achieve in order to promote the four well-beings in the present and for the future. So that's where we're based at the moment. So the community outcomes are based around the well-beings, and then it's up to each council to work out what those outcomes actually are for your city. The future definition could be the outcomes that a local authority aims to achieve in meeting the current and future needs of communities for good quality local infrastructure, local public services, and performance of regulatory functions. Those three things you're going to hear quite a lot about in the next little period. Not today's session, but that local infrastructure, local public services, and performance of regulatory functions, that's the new purpose of local government per the bill. We have got those five, and I'll go through those five in a moment, just in a fraction more detail. But effectively, in bleeding the vision down through the community outcomes into strategies and into action plans, that makes everything real. As Christine said earlier on, those five outcomes, if you Google the community outcomes of most of the other councils around the country, you'll come up with something similar-ish. It won't be exactly the same, but it'll be similar-ish. They cover most of the things that we're talking about. The top one's about people, the second one's about environment, the third one's about the layout of the city and the planning within the city, the fourth one's about transport, and the last one's about business and education. It's not rocket science. They will be very similar everywhere else. So the inclusive city one, Tauranga is a city that celebrates our past, connected in our present, invested in our future. People of all ages, beliefs, abilities and backgrounds are included and feel safe, connected and healthy. Not much in there you disagree with. You can change it, and most councils will. You know, there's a different slant every time we do these things, which is cool. But what's there is reasonably generic. I'm not going to read them all. You can read them if you want to. An environment one. And for each of these, there's a lead strategy. So the first one, the lead strategy, was the inclusive city strategy. This one's the environment strategy. The well-planned city. And the lead strategy there is the Connected Centres program. Moving around easily. Again, the Connected Centres program with the transport and movement focus of it. And then the TSP. And the business and education one, where the lead strategy is the joint strategy across the sub-region that Priority 1 led. Alongside those five, effectively what we will do, there's three how we will do it. And these have been developed in the last term, and they effectively commit us to a way of thinking in everything we do. The Te Ao Māori words, the sustainability and working beyond Tauranga, these are newish as far as writing them down and committing to them. They're not particularly new as far as concepts. And then to bring it all together, we worked with the Takawāinga team to try and create some sort of visual to see how this all fits together. And we ended up with a fishing net, the Kupenga. And Tarangapu were involved in this very much so, absolutely, yes. We ended up with a fishing net, which weaves together the five community outcomes, which is what we're trying to achieve for our communities, and the three approaches, which is how we'll go about things. The idea of the fishing net is fairly simple. It only works if everything's intertwined. It recognises that everything is intertwined, and if you miss a link somewhere along the line, you get a hole and you don't end up catching fish. Now, there's more words behind that. If Carlo was here, he would give you all sorts of anecdotes and stories around that, but that's the basic concept, is that it's only going to work and only going to hold, and you can be effective if everything works together. So, Mr. Chair, that's probably the first pause point, that real high-level vision, community outcome stuff.
Right, if anyone has any questions, good time to ask. I'm not going to call everyone out, but just ask the question and only one at a time, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So just, going back to vital update, when I went to the, I think that, to this, when I went to the, I think it was an Acorn something or other, they talked about vital updates and talking to their CEO, she talked about the amazing data that's in our vital updates and 350,000 spent on it. And can we access that data, please? Is that something we can have access to?
Yep. And thank you for saying Acorn, because Acorn were the third alongside Bay Trust and TECT, who were our partners at the time, which I'd forgotten.
But they didn't suggest they put much money in, not like us.
It was a partnership. So it's all on our website. So if you Vital Updates has got its own website, but if you simply typed in Vital Updates 2020, you get to the stuff which we use for the vision. And if you type in Vital Updates into Google 2023, you get the most recent one. That's also linked through on TCC's website. And it's all there, and there are reports in an abundance of detail. There's also dashboards where you can call up on things and dive down a bit deeper into some of the detail. So
Right,
it's all
thanks.
highly available, yep.
Councillor Shaw?
Oh, sorry.
Just in your initial speak there, talking about all different councils have their own way of doing this, and but the messages are essentially the same. And then also, obviously, within us, from Taronga's point of view, how much is this, like historically, of these things you're catching in this net? How many of them have been there since old mate across the road was first on? Like, how often does it change? And obviously these things need to be quite enduring. Just a bit of a background on what's been there in the past, or yeah.
Yeah, I haven't gone back to the first version of Community Outcomes, which would have been 2003-4, after the 2002 Act came in. I'd be confident to say it's 80% of what's there. That's right. Initially, we had a requirement in the Act to formally refresh them every 6 years. That has come out of the Act over the years. We tend to go back to the Council of the Day in the lead up to the LTP and say, either do you still like them or do you want to change them? The Commissioners had a tweak when they played with it. I can't remember whether Tenby's Council had a tweak or not, but yeah, it's probably 80% of that if you went back 20 years.
Yeah, no matter, and then potentially 80 is across every council.
Yep. I think what we did the last time is we pulled it more into a whole cohesive framework, because
Yep.
we'd had slices of it. So we'd always had the outcomes, and yes, the commissioners tweaked what the previous elected council had, but was very minor actually. They stuck with most of it. I think we had a city easy to get around, and they said a city we can move around easily. That was it was tweaking. So that layer
yank,
there,
isn't it?
but we had quite a few gaps in the lower layers, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
And that was probably where the focus has been on, and a lot of that was around parts of the community saying for some time you've got gaps here, and they wanted it addressed. So that was dealt with through that last piece of work that happened through the Commissioner's term.
Yeah, so that leads into my second question in terms of that, the intersection or the connection back to the community of this, and how that has sort of received over the different styles of this versus how much obviously it's an internal driver.
So, as Jeremy said, and we'll cover this a little bit more, as we've worked through each of these layers, there's been quite a lot of community engagement in each of these, but also in developing some of the action investment plans, particularly where there were gaps in the past. And so there was, on some of them, much more proactive work because there was big gaps, and there were feedback to those community groups in the general community, and consultation and engagement. So that happened quite comprehensively. Where some of the content comes from other processes, like say smart growth, there was less because it had happened through a smart growth process and it was joint, and so we picked that up and we just moved it into this framework that had been developed. But I think there is quite a lot of ownership in the community particularly on some parts of it where people were heavily involved. And Glenn was a participant, he'll probably have a view around that, and quite a lot of buy-in to what was trying to be achieved, even though people knew that not necessarily everything would be funded, and that's effectively what's happened, but at least there's a statement there on what the objectives are and what we're trying to achieve over the longer term, and different councils will choose to fund different things within that.
Yeah, I've just got one before Councillor Crowther. You mentioned the more youthful survey versus the more traditional. What's the difference in the feedback between those two surveys? Just for a curiosity question. Do they both groups want the same thing?
At that high level, not a heck of a lot. There was certainly more push to the vibrancy and events and things happening after dark in the younger group. You come back to the sort of pillars there about looking after everybody and being inclusive and looking after the environment, and that goes across every survey we do.
The data can be cut, though, by the different groups, so you can actually see that as well about what varies. Yep.
And I'm assuming you've kept all that background data and feedback and wish lists from past surveys, so if we wish to, we can pull it out. Councillor Crowther, do you have a question? Or both? This is a workshop, both.
Yep, that's what I thought. I was just going to respond, seeing Christine mention that, but I mean, it's obviously something I've shared my views with the council before. I think, firstly, the structure of it, I think, was very well received by the stakeholders. I think the staff did an amazing job of pulling together a really complex range of issues into some kind of formalised structure, which I haven't seen, before at TCC to quite the extent that this is, like with all the layers, even though there have been lots of good work in the past as well. But I think going from the top, like the people involved would probably say that there was good buy-in to those three things around nature and sort of a positive energy around it and all that. So I don't think there's any contention there. That I think the slogan or tagline, as you mentioned, Jeremy, that's often used separately, and it's better, I think, even just the use of font that we have to Tauranga Together We Can in big font, and then the other things in little. I think that's what makes it seem a little bit like it's left hanging a lot, because it's in people see the big letters. When you go down to the next level, though, and you have these already established, like the connected centres from AFTI, being what is the primary strategy that flows from two of those five, what are they called? Community outcomes. I think that's where you start getting into different views in our community. The stakeholders, I suspect, would be very supportive of a lot of that, especially the environment strategy, the inclusive city strategy. When you then go to those other two, the connected centres and the Western Bay economic strategy, I think there's a lot of disquiet, opposition, major concern from stakeholders, and as far as the public are concerned, I don't think there's any visibility at all. And I think the evidence of that was that some of the most engaged people in our city are my colleagues on this council, and some of them, I think it's fair to say, when you were elected, were not overly familiar with connected centres or the economic strategy. And I think, we haven't gone out publicly at any stage as a council on connected centres and asked people if that's what they want. And we haven't had any insight at all into the economic strategy. There's only been a one-pager from Priority One, which was sort of a contracted piece of work, as I understand it, or somehow through the funding from the council. There's been no community input at all. And I think that's where I would say things fell apart. So the rest of it, above it is fine, alongside it is fine, and underneath it is fine, from my point of view and the view of all the stakeholders I've heard. But those two things have not had any community consultation or engagement of any significance other than some targeted, narrow stuff, which wasn't even formal consultation. So to me, that's kind of, as I see it, you know, overall, if you take the whole page, 90% of it's great, but those are the core of it for a lot of people because they govern the key issues in our city.
Sorry, just going back to the sample and the surveys we did, a couple of questions. So how did that compare with previous times we might have gone and consulted on this sort of stuff? Was it good? Is that good numbers that we're looking at there?
So compared with consulting on something, they're extraordinary numbers. This really is engagement as opposed to consultation. It's blank piece of paper stuff. It's
Yep.
What do you think? The previous time we did it was in the sort of 2005, 2006 period, when we did a process called Tauranga Tomorrow. That had a lot of, it was a different structure there where we worked with a lot of other organisations, and the overall outcomes and what was going to be achieved was to be delivered by a lot of different organisations. We ended up with memorandums of understanding with 40 or 50 different organisations. We ran a massive process so that the community outcomes and the way forward approach at that stage, and that lasted probably for 8 or 10 years before it became out of fashion.
That was a legislative process under the LGA, and the LGA required you to work with other organisations, so it was quite a different framing that we were working under at that time. And it was good, but it started to peter out and people didn't stay committed across the board. I think this one was, the difference probably is that it was a much broader range of topics, so it wasn't, even that Tauranga Tomorrow one was really led by the council and seen and pitched as a council, branded as a council process, whereas Vital Signs, because it was a collaborative effort, even though there were different funding contributions, it was very much framed as a collaborative effort of ACORN and TECT and Bay Trust and ourselves. And so people thought about their city in a broader context than just council. So I think that's the difference between that one and perhaps what had gone before.
Okay.
To add to that, the My Tauranga vibe, the whole campaign had very little reference to Tauranga City Council. It was just provoking conversations. It adds at one stage, you know, do you like red or blue? On an Instagram post, you know, do you like beaches or do you like hills? And nobody really knew that they were playing with TCC and the future vision for the city when they were just offering their opinions. So, yeah, different approach.
So extending the question a little bit. So we're now 3-4 years down the track. We've had COVID, we've had economic recessions. How valid do you think the thinking is in this stuff? So that's the first question. And the second part of the question is, when would you go out and do this again if you were having to make the choice yourselves?
I certainly wouldn't choose to go out and do it again yet. 2022 is not that long ago. 2020 isn't much longer ago. It's about your comfort with what we've got. If you collectively think that it's not fresh enough or it's not relevant enough, then we need to do another one. We need to budget for it, plan for it, and do it. But I would have thought that sort of 8 to 10 years is a lifespan which would work normally. The community outcomes, the next layer beneath the vision, and I said initially the Act says formally review it every 6 years. That came out, so you can formally review it whenever you like, less than 6 years even then, but that probably gave a license to not be pushed into formally reviewing it after 6 years. So at a statutory level, they're probably talking 6 to 10, but it's not written down in statute anymore. But I would have thought, yeah, 6 to 8 to 10 is plenty early enough.
I think there's lots of conversations about what does the future of local government look like. So you need to think too about sunk costs. If you were to do something and the future of local government looks quite different, would it still be relevant, or would it be better to have more clarity around some of the changes that are happening, RMA, the role of central versus local government, and do something within that environment rather than now when it's not as certain and this is still relatively fresh.
No more questions? Right, carry on. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. So the next piece then is turning the high-level stuff into action. And obviously a lot of stuff that we do is delivered through business as usual. And then the phrase action and investment plans, which you're familiar with, is the other strand, I guess, of how we get things done around here. What is an action investment plan? So they are a roadmap over time of what we can achieve. And as Christine mentioned earlier on, when the actions and investment plans were created, and an action investment plan is a phrase. You can call it an implementation plan, you can call it just an action plan. It was a phrase which the previous council decided was what they wanted to use. The list you've got at the moment, all the grey boxes in this thing, the bottom half of it says action and investment plans. Half of them are not called an action investment plan, half of them are something else. There's this plan, there's that strategy, and there's various other bits and pieces, a master plan for the airport. They're all colloquially action and investment plans. But we recognise in creating the new ones that not everything can be funded in one go, and we told everybody involved in those processes that that would be the case. And everyone acknowledged that. We'd rather have a clear roadmap of things which ought to happen to achieve a particular goal and know that they're written down even if they're not funded at the moment, because a future more enlightened council might decide to fund them. And that was the pitch at the time, and that's exactly where things have ended up. Some of them are TCC documents, some of them are jointly owned with Western Bay, some of them are contribute to one strategy quite clearly, and there's a clear line of sight. And the biggest weakness of this document is that it's nice and square and linear. And when it comes to action plans and doing things, the links are not quite as obvious. And a lot of the action plans and the actions within the action plans actually cross over and affect more than one strategy, affect more than one community outcome, get to the vision in various different ways. So while it's laid out in nice columns for ease of reading, it's a fraction messier than that.
I think yesterday one of the councillors raised exactly this question in City Delivery and said, does this fit better here or here? So yesterday in City Delivery, I think one of the councillors asked exactly this question, does this fit here or does it fit in some other strategy? And we tried to find where what we saw as the primary link, knowing that there are other links to other areas, and which is exactly this, and that's the Kupinga, the fishnet demonstrates that as well.
Sorry.
So just pondering that, Christine, and I think it therefore, I guess it's when we're achieving or not achieving further up based on a AIP, and we might actually find that one is saying we've achieved that but not achieved that, but that actually might be because those two things down the bottom, one that failed and one that was going well, could have been in a different line, and so it's that must have an impact. Do we go back and does anything change when we review what outcomes we're getting out of the AIPs?
The big problem with outcomes and outcome measurements is always attribution.
Correct.
So at a very high level, an outcome may change, better or worse. Working backwards to say, is that because we did what we said we were going to do and we did it really well? Or is it because of other forces? Or is it a combination? Or is it because that one action that we had, despite the rest of the world having 97 different actions to do, the one action that we did and didn't do well was the cause of the outcome not proceeding? So attribution is always a big problem. We've tried to address that through the LTP by splitting out the outcome measures from the sort of controllable action measures of council. But again, it's grey. And joining what we do, what we think we need to do to amend an outcome, and then doing it and assessing whether the outcome has shifted because of that is very difficult. Most actions are fairly short-term. Most outcomes are always long-term.
So have we ever, in the feedback, it's, the 130, but there was number 900 that Rod saw yesterday. So have we proven that having 131 AIPs that we set up, we measure, we report, and we carry on with, have we demonstrated that that actually gives outcomes, and do we get feedback in general to say, love the way things are set up, it's so easy to tell whether you're succeeding or not as a council?
No. No, and that's,
And I think the reality is, for most people out there doing their jobs, picking the kids up from kindergarten, doing the groceries and looking after the parents or whatever it might be, this is not something that will grab them and they're going to give us that sort of feedback. But I think where there's people with a passion, they will give us that feedback. So there will be people who are particularly interested, and we'll talk about waste in a minute in terms of waste, and be saying, are you getting us closer to the goal of reducing waste, increasing recycling and reuse? And they'll be looking at those things. Someone else who's particularly interested in the cycling will be saying, are you increasing the facilities quantity and safety of cycling facilities so that we can get around the city? So I think it's unlikely that a member of the community is going to look at the whole package, but parts of your community will hone in on particular things, and it's your role to gather all of that information and step back and look at the bigger picture, because that's how a community will work. And you know, Tangata Whenua are watching very carefully on the environment stuff. You know, they'll give you some clear messages when they feel we're not delivering with integrity on our environmental commitments. So there are a range of voices in your community.
And I guess that's a good example, because would they question way up? Would they be questioning, like we do hear about the waste one, and that's down here, or are the tangata whenua, mana whenua questions much higher up in the, are we actually, is one of our principles that we are, our approach to Te Ao Māori way at the top? I guess it's both, okay. It just seems, I just want to make sure that when we look at such a complex, resource-heavy way of this is doing and reporting, are we getting value at it? Is this adding value to delivery to the people of Tauranga? And I'm struggling to understand whether it is. So that's sort of my question on absolutely here. And when we have a business case, we might have to point to, absolutely should be pointing to, what is this, where is this attached? Like, we do have a strategic objective in every report we get. I'm less able to understand that the AIP, and 130 of them, I shouldn't keep saying a number.
37.
37? Okay. Are actually are worth having at that level.
so this is why, in creating the ones which were seen to be gaps in the last 2 or 3 years, so we did a big stock take of what have we got as far as current documents, and where are the gaps, and things like probably the only council in the country at the time which didn't have an environment strategy, which Councillor Crowther told me several times during the process. We then work with the subject matter experts in-house and in the community to say, well, what is it we need to put in there in the action plan for the climate plan, for instance? What are the actions which are reasonable that council should be taking, and create that route map? Then second question is, we'll ask council, are you prepared to fund those? Which is a different conversation, which came through the LTP. But the actions themselves, that list of actions potentially for funding, came from that group combining members of the community, Tangata Whenua reps, 3 of them I think on that project, and subject matter experts from this organisation and from the regional council, all sort of building together and saying, well, what are the practical things which we could do? Create that list in that instance, the climate AIP, and then come back to council and say, here's the long list, here's the potential cost of each of those projects and some suggested timing from the staff. What do you want to include in your LTP? And the answer was some, but not all. And that was the same answer for most of the new AIPs, was some of the stuff, yes, but not all of it.
So Jen's question, but within house, what is the value of the structure and the way we do these things to the organisation and getting these things done? I know it's not probably entirely visible to the community, but does it have good traction and value for what we do here?
I think it does, because it gives the staff clear direction. So if you look now at, we're going through an organisational reset, you can have significant change at a senior level, and over time, our turnover rate, there's constantly people coming through. This sets out what the council is saying its position is on particular topics and why. And so anyone can pick that up and go, okay, I understand the council's position, and they can take a council line. A member of the public can pick it up and understand if they've got a particular interest in a particular topic. So it's not just the actions, it's the philosophy and thinking behind it. So if you look at something like the Tauranga parking strategy, that provides your whole rationale and thinking about parking within the context of an overall transport strategy. And so anyone can pick that up and have a look at it. Similarly, the city centre plan and the precincts all sit in the city centre plan. So yes, it's called an action investment plan, but anyone can look that up and understand what's sitting there. You might want to change those documents, you might want different content, but the fact that they exist and tell a story to anybody externally, for elected members to understand the current direction that we're heading, and then you can look at it and say we want to change it or we want to retain bits of it. And for staff to know how everything fits together, it's really useful.
Councillor Crowther.
Just clarifying, if the public are listening in, that my understanding is there are 27, what are they called, topic-based AIPs, action and investment plans, and of those 7 are collaborative with other organisations. So when you break it down, we've got these place-based plans, which I think 9, and they're things that council chooses to do anyway, whether or not they're called an AIP. I imagine, it's just, they just fit in nicely with this. So you've kind of got another 27. Now, 7 of those were already either certainly, going ahead from other organisations or structures, or were almost certainly going ahead. And so you're really left with a much smaller number, say 20 more, of which when you compare that, and I remember Mary Dillon talking about the number of plans and policies and things that are sort of sitting there from the past. This was my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Christine, that this was to sort of almost get rid of stuff as opposed to add more for the staff. So to say, let's get rid of the backlog so you know clearly what you're working with, what's approved. So perhaps if you want to add anything, contradict me if you need to, please.
There was a number of more individually narrower topic areas, and some of them hadn't been updated for some time, and then there were some big gaps like climate change. There was nothing, very, very little. So there was a merging and bringing together and then filling the gaps, and there were a number that were just totally outdated and no longer relevant, and so they were deleted. So this then became the complete package of updated, and there were no remaining gaps. There was a couple that read at the bottom that you can see links to local water done well, so they're in a hold pattern, but they're there as drafts. So it was a bigger mixture of many things, of which much was outdated because successive councils, to be frank, couldn't get agreement around the table about actually their views on many of these things, and so a lot of it was outdated and needed to be updated. So.
Arthur.
I just want to pick up what Jen was saying about Te Ao Māori, to avoid it being aspirational. How would you measure outcomes on Te Ao Māori? And the other question is, is it possible to integrate it into an AIP?
Can we go back a few slides to the
So the intention here is that Te Ao Māori approach goes across everything. And there's a plan which sits behind that, which was created from within the Takawanga team working with Te Rangapu. That has been signed off at the executive level, so each of the things on the left have been signed off at the executive level as far as how we go about things, with the outcomes being signed off at the the council level, because that's what we're trying to achieve. So that plan has got some metrics in it. We have not reported back against that formally yet, have we? It's all fairly fresh. But there's a number of actions in there. Again, they won't all be able to be implemented in week 1, year 1, but they will. There's a roadmap in there as what could happen, roll out across the organisation. There's some cultural capability stuff. There's the fact that each of our council reports now has a section headed Te Ao Māori impact, and that wasn't there before the Te Ao Māori approach was established. It's a direct result. Yep.
And yeah, carry on.
So this is just to recognise that while there's a lot of documents on this page, it's not every document which we produce. So there's another sort of layer of other things which aren't at that action and investment plan level, things like the reserve management plan, the urban design guidelines, the city plan. There's a bunch of other things there. So just to recognise this is not a list of every document TCC owns. The example we talked about, Christine just mentioned, the line of sight type approach. So you create a city vision which has got environmental nature type words in it. You have a community outcome which talks about valuing and protecting the environment, an environment strategy which expands on that, and then you get down to the who does what does when, which is the waste management and minimisation plan, which by any other name is an AIP. So within the waste management and minimisation plan, you have got actions which require budget and have timelines, and those then form part of what goes into your LTP and your annual plans, part of which you see then as the reporting back against the actions. And you had a report yesterday talking about some of the OPEX costs which are in the waste management plan, very nice and timely, it was helpful. And then if you look at that on your diagram, it's all there. You see that line of sight from one red circle to another red circle to another one to another one. That's the framework. The contents of the framework is entirely changeable. You know, if you've got views on different things within there, we can start talking about different strategies, different action plans. But the way the framework works, working down from a vision, down through the community outcomes, through lead strategies, into action investment plans, is probably helpful to structure things for you.
And I think our advice would be best use of resource, if you want to, and you're giving a clearly steer to us around value for money, is for your changes to be within rather than the framework, because frameworks are sort of pretty much of a muchness in some ways, and we did do a whole lot of work on best practice to try to come up with a framework that had longevity and could be kept in place through successive councils with different political or strategic direction views, that would still be sound. So, so I think our recommendation would be not to change the framework, but to focus your political steer on the content and the delivery and what we actually do in the city rather than the framework itself. It would be probably the best use of resources and money.
That's a microphone. The next slide is the simple plan, do, review type cycles. You start on the left with the framework. You build things into the long-term plan, annual plan. You then deliver. You then roll around the right-hand side and you do the progress reporting. You've already seen a couple of reports against the action investment plans. The annual report was on your agenda yesterday as well. And then you come across back up to the top bit, which is on a 3-yearly basis. You look at the strategy and the action plans. You do a bit of a stock take. Where are we at on these things? What's working? What's not working? Where's our focus as a council? You might look at this whole thing and go, third grey box up on the middle column, I don't want to do any of that for the next 10 years. Okay, that's cool. It'll still sit there as the route map to achieve those things, but this council will decide not to fund it. I'm not sure what the third one up with anyway, but that's where the LTP process becomes really important, because you give us that steer as to what it is that you want to fund with the intention of leading up towards those outcomes. Broad brush timings.
That was a really strong, am I allowed to interrupt? Yep. So what actions do we want to fund that enable the delivery of what we're achieving? So that to me is sometimes where I don't quite know the process of when things are requested of us. So from that must happen internally. There's the team say we need to, in order to deliver this, we need to do these activities, and then that gets into some format that gets to us either during the year or before annual plan. At a executive and management level in-house, do you have a plan of that for the year? That yes, are you seeing now opportunities for spaces and places to bring things into a meeting in December because they want to do that in order to meet this objective they've got? How does all that work over
So most
a
of
year?
it, which is Jeremy's next slide, swings off the long-term plan. So you set that program of work for the investment for the 3 years, and then each annual plan, you basically take the annual plan direction that was set, year 2 or year 3 for the subsequent years, and you tweak it a bit. But it is, so if we go to the next slide, I think that will partly answer your question. And it's a little bit unusual because you were appointed out of cycle, if you want to put it that way. So normally what would happen is a council would come in, it would have a year to sort of get things under the belt, and it would start working on a long-term plan. You've come in and you've got a longer long-term plan run-in period because you were appointed when the commissioners left. So that's it. So the cycle would enable normally an elected council to more quickly set their strategic direction through the upcoming LTP. You've got an extra round or year because you were appointed out of sequence.
So what, in round figures, what percentage of operational and capital approved in the annual plan would be activities that are in one of the 36 AIPs? Are these quite a large part of what we do?
Everything, well, I think if you think about the investment that you make through the long-term plan in terms of capital or annual plan, it's got 3 components. Renewals, which is pretty much just looking after the assets that you've got and making sure they can continue to deliver the service. So that's really an asset management thing, an asset's getting end of life. So that's a more mechanical process. That doesn't really come out of the AIPs.
Yeah, that's
It's just separate,
somewhere.
so that's a big chunk of your expenditure. Then your second chunk is growth, and that's driven predominantly by your urban growth, so smart growth, where you're going to put your growth, and your future development strategy, and your growth structure plans, and things like your water and wastewater network planning and your transport system plan. So that's where most of that, which is your big money, your other growth-related investment in community infrastructure comes out of things like your active reserve recreation plan and your community infrastructure strategy, which is probably an area where there is more political direction about what you want to achieve, because you can still build a house with that at different levels of service or different timeframes or different locations, where you have to have a wastewater pipe going to a particular location to be able to get a house to open. So I think there's more, so that's stronger in here. And then the third area is increasing level of service. So putting an investment in which isn't necessarily for growth and isn't to renew something, but you want to achieve better outcomes or different outcomes for your community. So that might be things like the exhibition space that is going to be in the new Te Manawataki Otapapa, some of the work you're doing in the waterfront and the city centre. It contributes to growth, but it actually uplifts in terms of outcomes for your community. And those things, that third slice, are quite strongly in this framework. So if you think about it in those bits, and then operational expenditure comes out of here, but it's not, as you would have seen yesterday, it's not big and relative to the capital investment. Yeah.
So yesterday's report on the AIP OPEX, that list, I didn't add it up, but it would have come to single figure millions on a OPEX budget of 400 million a year. So it's not massive. Having said that, there are some historical actions in the waste management and minimisation plan, for instance, which was adopted in 2022, had an action which was to introduce the curbside recycling. Well, that's a $12 million a year contract itself, or $12 million a year budget itself. So there can be some bigger items in there, but that We didn't do that because it was in the WMMP. We wrote it in the WMMP because that conversation was well underway with the Council of the Day from the 2016 Waste Management Plan, which is where it was kicked off.
Presenters, we've had people say it's quite hard to hear around the table. Both of you, when you move a bit, can you just bring them a bit closer? I'm finding it not easy to hear, and we have had people say it's quite hard hearing us online.
I just want to apologise first. I'm still learning a lot about how the council works. So I'm getting this picture that this vision works down this, and you got two Kuping working across this way. So I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Te Ao Māori values are in all of these plans.
In the new ones, yes. So as we were developing, so most of the ones which have got adopted sort of 2023 in them, because those are the 9 or 10 or 11 new ones developed through this catch-up process we ran over the last few years. We were developing the 3 strands at the same time, and each of those has a section in them which talks about how we were addressing sustainability, how we were addressing Te Ao Māori, and how we were addressing working across Tauranga. So yes. That's
cool. And just one other question is, where is tangata whenua aspirations in here?
One of the, in the light green strands which go right across the top as far as overarching leadership and direction. One of those is smart growth, where tangata whenua we're a partner, and the other one is the iwi management plan from 2016. So those sit across the relevant things. Yeah, at a human level, people were involved very much in the development of the more recent AIPs. Like I said, I think there were 3 representatives on the climate AIP one that myself and Glenn were involved with for quite a long time, and quite strong opinions and very useful to the project.
And we also worked with the Tarangapu as well, so they were fully, cognizant of this process and what was happening. So yeah.
Just before we carry on, just some alignment issues. So we've got this lovely lot of AIPs sitting here. You get a change of government, get a national policy change, and we're about to do the resource management change and the environment change plan. How is that going to impact on this, and how much more work's it going to generate for the council staff?
So some things will, by statute, have to change. So things like the smart growth strategy will become the new regional spatial plan. But much of the work that's in there can be picked up and applied into the new framework, but there will have to be some additional things. Things like the transport system plan, when it changed from Labour, it was done in a Labour context and it shifted to national, but I think some of the thinking is that we work out what's right for our city, and then as government policy shifts, then we take those opportunities where the actions align more directly to the government's policy of the day to proceed with those if funding's available, leave the others still there because we still think that's important for our city, and then when there's, as there generally is, the pendulum swings the other way, then you pick up those opportunities that relate to the other aspects of what you're trying to achieve. So there was a strong focus on walking and cycling and PT. That is part of the connected centres approach, because we can't just build roads because there's just not enough capacity and there's not enough lane width, but we also need a capacity improvement. So now we're trying to take those actions forward that need capacity improvements. If there's a shift and a swing in central government that moves back to public transport, walking and cycling, then the priority projects that link to that out of the TSP would be the ones we'd be trying to move forward. So I think the overarching thing is what's right for the city, and then within that, taking opportunities when they come up, not necessarily changing your entire strategy to align with a government policy direction of the time if you don't think that's actually going to give you the right outcome on balance over time. So that's, yeah.
Thank you very much. So basically, we don't have to change the entire investment plan, just the way we apply it to align.
So the way we apply it to align, or where there's specific statutory requirements like there will be around a spatial plan, we make sure we need to tick the legislative boxes, but other than that, it's your city, you determine your strategic direction, and then you choose the best way and how to get the best value for money and delivery for your community over time. Yep.
And effectively, the same process applies with a change around this table. You know, if you've created a roadmap to achieve some outcomes and one council wants to fund things and this next council doesn't want to fund things in that area, they simply stop funding it. The roadmap stays the same, it just isn't implemented for a while. And that's, you know, that's the beauty, I guess, in some ways. If you've got written down what you think you ought to do to achieve something, you can either change what you think you're going to do or just simply not fund it for a while. And with, you know, the potential removal of the well-beings in your collective reaction to that, you may look at some of these documents and go, we don't want to put as much effort into that one over the next 3 years, 10 years of the next LTP than somebody else.
And you might also want to think about the things that you do want to achieve and say, are they already in here in some place? And if they're not, where would they fit in, and modify them to achieve that? So you can, and as I said, my suggestion is you wouldn't change the framework too much, but you know, does it reflect what you want to achieve? And if there's gaps in here in terms of the direction you think the city should be going in, we can provide some guidance about where that particular issue or direction that you want to achieve would best fit, and then modify that and change it. So you can do an update, you can delete, you can change, you can add whatever you want based on your own view of what the world looks like.
Any more questions? Probably just work us through the timeline chart in a bit more depth, what we can aim as us, as a body, achieve at each milestone, so to speak.
So this is broad, but now 2 years, a bit closer, I'll lean back and be comfortable. This is broad, but you know, we're 2 years away from the adoption of the next LTP, which is good, but it will go quickly. So at this sort of stage in the process, and staff are just beginning to sort of work on a strategy stocktake type approach. You know, let's look at what we've got, what's still relevant from a staff perspective. If you've got an action investment plan where 98 of the 100 actions have already been completed this year, well, the action investment plan itself isn't worth much anymore. We either come back to you and say, do you want a fresh round of actions, or do we just ignore it and leave it there? So that stocktake happens first. We'll bring that back to you in stages then, because there'll be a lot of information. Clearly, this sort of stage, normally with a council arriving in October, we would look to sort of test the strategic direction with them then. We've got a fraction more time with you guys, which is helpful. But today is part of that end 2025, early 2026 process. You know, engage on, test the strategic direction. If you really hate it, well, let's roll our sleeves up and do something different. If you can live with it but want to tweak it, well, let's roll our sleeves up and do the tweaks. If you think it's all fantastic, then we all sit back and go to the beach for the summer. But we'll need to test that with you, and today's the beginning of that process. Depending on what happens then, we will then update plans, change plans, develop a new plan. If you suddenly want and think that the best way to create vibrancy in the city is to create a zoo, then we'll go off and create a zoo action somewhere and start working on a zoo business plan or whatever. And when that starts to roll together, you will find that we are then developing an LTP. It's quite organic at that stage, because as you give us the strategic direction and tell us what's important to you, that then starts rolling down into first drafts of budgets and working plans for teams, and then that stuff starts to bubble back up to you. And towards the second half of next year, we'll bring a lot of information to you, which is building the LTP formally, but a lot of it will be familiar to you because of the conversations in the preceding 12 months. And then we end up with the formal process towards the end, which is adopt a draft, consult on it, deliberate on it, adopt a final. So where to from here? Sorry, you want to add something to that one?
So to the decision that you make on whether or not you're consulting on the next annual plan with the public, or whether you don't have to consult. So if you might choose to say, we want to actually spend our time and effort talking to the community about the strategic direction and doing some preliminary consultation around the long-term plan, and just adopt the annual plan if there's no major issues. That's something that you need to think about, and that affects all those timelines. They're all calls for you to make about where do you want to put your efforts and what conversations do you want to have with your community.
Councillor Crowther.
Staff will know what I'm going to say probably. I would like to personally consult on connected centres / transport / whatever, transport system plan. I don't know how to frame it up. It needs to be just framed up in a comprehensive package, I think, of all of it, acknowledging that connected centres is more than just transport. But I think the transport component is the sort of more tangible, community-orientated discussion that could happen. And I would also like to, as I've said many times in the old chamber anyway, as a submitter, like to come up with an economic strategy that has the buy-in of the people of Tauranga. So whether or not either of them are going to change, I don't know. I have no preconceived ideas about what specifically our community will think of them. They may love it, they may want to change it, but the point to me is we should move forward, in my view, with the backing of our community for what is, two of the 4 key documents for the whole city. And if we don't have that mandate, I always feel like everything else becomes a bit of a sort of secondary issue, because they're driving a lot of the things that are underneath it. So to me, I have no problem with the structure. I think it's fantastic work from staff. I think, to me, the vision's, it's whatever the people who like the vision stuff, whatever they think's best in terms of communicating it. In terms of the AIPs, I think it's more streamlined and better for staff from what I hear, and better for the public than I've seen before. So it's really just that one level, which is the key strategies. To me, they might be fine, they might not, but we should go out and actually say, what do you guys think about it? So that's my strong urge to my colleagues.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My personal view is that we shouldn't be going into an annual plan which is just a refinement of the Commission's long-term plan. I think that the city needs our leadership and deserves it, given that we're an elected council, and I think that we should be doing an LTP next year.
Can you get a bit closer to the microphone?
Let's do an LTP next year.
So, there's probably one slide that wasn't on your pack, just to recognise that we haven't forgotten it all. So during the annual plan, you created these principles, adapted the principles which were there. So that, again, while it's not part of the strategic framework, when we start to pull everything together from the strategic side to the practical side, the value for money side, this stuff is still live as far as we're concerned, and is very much part of the implementation of all that strategic stuff you've just seen. Just where to next? So we'll take responsibility for the bottom bullet point, and start that strategic stock take. That's my team were meeting last week on that. And the other ones are largely questions for you. It's about where are you at collectively with the structure, and then with the content, and let us know.
Thank you. Can I just go back to the last slide? The one, our priorities. Yep. So how many of the AIPs have been reviewed to see whether they meet these requirements?
So it's not a case of reviewing the AIPs, it's a case of using these principles when you decide what you're going to fund and whether the actions are the sort of thing that you want to be doing. That's the way I see it.
Yes, but the annual plan has been approved. We haven't approved it line by line. Were the projects that are within an AIP, have staff consciously said how much of this are we meeting? Because it might have actually been there since 2 years ago, right? So have they, is there a, if an AIP has been set based on the long-term plan 2 years ago before these happened, but this current year's spending has been approved in the annual plan, those projects might not have been through this review, right?
So when the group managers were asked to make savings, and so we made significant savings from what was in the draft, what was in the year of the LTP.
Yeah.
This was the lens
Right,
that
okay.
they, and you asked us specifically to do that with as minimal impact on service delivery to the community as possible. So that was the lens that was applied. So certainly when we do the strategy stock take and the AIP stock that Jeremy talked about, which is we're about to start as part of the lead up to the long-term plan, we can look through those and identify ones where you might want to have this conversation. There might be some that stand out, like actually, okay, is that really value for money, or is that affordability, or was there a sufficient robust analysis done on this particular one? So there are sometimes projects, I think there was one the other day about a community facility on one of the reserves that the Mayor spoke about. That was a specific direction that was given to staff on how that was to be done, and you might have a different lens on that. So we could identify ones that we think might fit in that category, which I think is what you're asking when we do that stock take.
No, I think your answer that this lens has been applied over the annual plan because that was required to take those costs out. I think that's a really good start, and so that's comfortable. Thank you.
Me again. I see the ones down in red down the bottom of this here. I guess they're coming under this local water done well when that, well, if that CCO gets formed. There's also some of this budgeted under the smart growth strategy. Are there any others in here that take some of the costs for implementing the stuff?
Are you thinking about water-related matters? Is that what you're asking? No?
What are these plans are in collaboration with other strategies? Do you know what I mean? No? So the local water done well, that'll eventually be a couple of councils coming together sharing the expenses. Smart growth also has the same kind of strategy. Yeah. So that also has impact over the overall budget.
So Smart Growth is a partnership arrangement with the Tangata Whenua and the two other councils, and so we bring that strategy through, and then in the action investment plans or the long-term plan, we bring TCC's implementation responsibilities through. The stormwater strategy, the water strategy and the wastewater strategy are only in relation to the Tauranga City Council area, and this is predominantly around how we manage our networks and renewals and things, and it just wasn't able to be, it wasn't felt appropriate at the time for council to sign them off because all the bills were still going through and we didn't have a legislative direction, and so the general manager signed them off. You'll see here it says approved by the general manager as a draft, and then it was left as a working piece until we had the law tell us what we needed to do, and then these would probably need some level of tweaking. And then the thinking was you'd want to get it to a point where you hand it over to the waters entity, whatever it's going to be, because that sets your direction in some ways, and it's your last big footprint as a council on these, other than then working through your statement of expectations and your shareholders' agreement. So they're actually quite important documents, and that's why we left them as a working draft, because you transfer them across and you can say, we actually expect you to take note of these, if that makes sense. So there is an opportunity here for you to exercise a level of governance before these things cross over to the new entity, whatever you choose, if you choose a new entity. Just to come back, sorry, if you want to, just to come back to the point that Glenn raised around Connected Centres program and TSP, I think at a staff level, we probably would urge a caution about looking at Connected Centres now, and the reason is that a lot of that is going to be directed by RMA, the spatial plan, and also the national policy statements, and so the likelihood that some of the choices that you've been able to make in the past in terms of your urban form will actually be directed quite specifically by the government through those processes. So TSP you probably got a bit more flexibility with, but I think in terms of the urban form, which is effectively what Connected Centres is, you could spend some time and money doing some work and then find it's sunk cost and you have to redo it in a different context under a new legislative and regulatory framework. So given what we currently know, we probably wouldn't be recommending that you do that at this time. But that we may be clear about that in another couple of months, but that's our current understanding, that the Crown might be very directive around some of this stuff.
Yeah, just one on that. Yeah, I'm fully aware that the Crown, with the medium density housing, going for growth, housing growth, how we invest and where we invest is going to become what dictated in a way, along with the funding, that support that may or may not come with it. So as far as the amount of workload that's coming potentially to council between that and the resource management and the environment paper, we're going to be just busy enough in the next 6 months. So whatever we do is going to be very targeted. Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, no, apologies to my Tauranga Ward colleague when we amalgamate the wards. I just want to comment on your comment, Christine. I think that's a really good point. I think probably where I'm looking also for staff guidance is, having spoken in the Transport Committee a couple of times on, what the priorities were for that committee. I think there was a mood on that committee to do something with public engagement sooner rather than later, so we could get everything lined up, the plans all done, all the pieces in place for the 27 National Land Transport Plan cycle, which would mean doing something in the next year to go out to the public on just the transport component. So I kind of highlighted it before. I think you're quite right. We probably should focus solely on that. Do you see any issues with, I know there's always a risk the government will come in over the top on that with regional decision making, but is there any downside to going out on transport that you see? I think the steer from transport was that it was good, but from a strategy level.
I think it's quite different from the connected centres. So I think once in another month or two we'll get a little bit more understanding about how far the urban form comments are going to impact on transport. So we do know that they might actually be quite directive about where you need to put PT corridors and the type of housing around that. So that may take some of the question marks away. But I probably will just reiterate, I think if you want to work in one of those two spaces, the transport one, I think, would be better investment for your money, because it's probably going to have more longevity, and we're getting the message out and clear about value for money. So that there would be some benefit of doing that. I suppose the question is, how much would it likely change from the strategic direction that you have, and how can you target that to be a well-informed conversation on things that the community can make a difference on. So that would be so that we're just not going out with a blank page, because we do not have a blank page as a city. So it's about how you develop that scope and how you engage with the community. But I can't see any damage to be done, and I don't think it's wasted effort. And the context is probably going to be sort of relatively similar to what we know in the transport space.
I think, just very briefly, I think good points again, and we have a good TSP framework to go out with something, and I think the transport team and Nick had ideas on what that could look like, so maybe we could pick that up with them.
Councillor Shaw, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, sir. Just a quick question in relation to the city priorities. One, enabling land, housing development. Two, addressing transport issues. Three, delivering quality amenities, community facilities. Four, enhancing our environment. And then there's investing in creating a regionally significant city centre. So in the absence of us having gone through this process entirely ourselves, we came across 1, 2, 3 and 4 already, and you'd argue by the way we've made decisions, we've also backed the concept of the significant city centre. But my question is, how does this here come out of this in terms of the prioritisation and the short term versus obviously some of these things are very much part of the long-term plan?
My recollection is the Commission looked at the framework and were comfortable, and they were part of the development of all of this, and then they stepped back and said, this is, if you think about the long term, the medium to long term, this is the sort of city we want and the components that make it up. We don't have enough financial capacity, people capacity or others to do all of that
Yes.
in the next in the LTP that they were setting up. So then they said, for us as a commission, what are the things that we want to prioritise and ensure we're investing and working on? And so they sucked up from here those 5, and then that guided them in making their long-term plan decisions. So that's something similar I would expect yourselves as a group of councillors. If you land that you're broadly comfortable with this approach in general, you might want to say there's bits, gaps we want to add, and then of this, what are your 5 priorities of these things that you want to focus on, either through the next annual plan or the long-term plan that you'll develop and then leave as your legacy to the incoming council subsequently.
And obviously, some of these issues we've already found with Cameron Road, or certain things, some of the transport stuff, we're not entirely in control of, so
Correct.
it's massively a priority, but not entirely just us. And it also may well be that we agree in principle on those same things, slightly different weighting or a different rate of doing that.
Or you might agree in principle to that, but you might say, actually, we think within that objective, these are the 2 or 3 most important projects or initiatives, and we're going to push hard on these,
Yep.
and we're going to make them happen. And if they're not under your control entirely, we're going to use influence, efficacy, partnership, and that's where we're going to focus
them to
to bring those to life. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Finished? Done? Any more questions, queries, statements which to be made? Right, we've got 5 minutes till our next one, so we'll end this workshop here. Thank you very much to Christine and to Jeremy. We've all learnt something, I hope. Right, we'll end the workshop right here.
Sorry for triggering. Hey, I've been watching.